Yeah, you are. So what's fucking wrong with you? Welcome to my first album review of 2019. My plan is to do an album review for every single one of the albums that I mentioned in the first video of the year. We've got some incredible records coming out this year, and I think it's a really good idea to take a real in-depth look at this album and see what I love and what I don't love about it. And then by the end of the year we'll have this great collection of work, and I can comment on that, maybe, or something along those lines. Today we're looking at Lost Under Heaven's second album, entitled Love Hates What You've Become. Their first album was an album I absolutely fell in love with. I first came across them when listening to their record Sorrow. It just got me out of nowhere. It was like trap, alternative grunge, Modest Mouse meets Gabba. And, you know, try and explain that to anyone and not get a weird look. So the rest of the album I just became obsessed with. I don't really know how, I just carried on listening to records by them and loved everything that they put out. I then went to see them at Reading Festival in 2016, and unfortunately they just didn't pull a crowd. Everyone I introduced the album to loved the album, so I was very shocked that it didn't have as much commercial success as it did. But then tracks popped up on things like 13 Reasons Why and other great shows. So clearly their music is something that's doing well. So when I found out they're releasing new music, I got super excited. And what I want to do today is go through this record track for track, and let's talk about what I love and what I don't love about it. And then we'll try and work towards a score. We'll see how this goes. Comments at the bottom as always. Let's see how we go. Track number 1. Come. Certainly a heavier evolution since album number 1, especially for their opening track. The synths are fatter, the bass is crunchier, the guitars roll more, and the drums are, for want of a better word, more gabbery. Come reminds me of this evolution of the track Sorrow, taken from their first album. It's the perfect kind of experimental. It kind of reminds me of this Crystal Castles, Does It Offend You? Yeah kind of hype, whilst remaining incredibly I can imagine this track going down very well, and I think it works really well as an opening track. Bunny Blues, track 2, is a record that actually made it into Music Club earlier this year. It's a track I absolutely loved when I first came across it, and I'm really excited to... There we go. Bunny Blues sees Ebony take the reins for the first time on this record. On album number 1, she managed to lead the way on the song Future Blues. Sitting around in his place. That was a much softer record. This one, complete opposite. Again, we've gone from here to here with energy. Bunny Blues is certainly not stopping in terms of pushing through. This one has a more distorted industrial feel than track number 1, and paints this really dark image of someone using a stiletto as a knife, pushing it into someone's chest. It's pretty gruesome. And as I said in Music Club, when Ellery's vocal comes in at the end, wonderful. Track number 3 really begins to slow this down a little bit with Breath of the Light, which was the B-side to Bunny Blues when it came out earlier on last year. And I fell in love with it then when it first came out. It's this wonderful opposite to Bunny Blues. It's this almost kind of love song. It's almost a ballad, really. It grows really well, it flows wonderfully. Ellery uses a much more softer vocal, and it has plenty of space. Ellery really shows the scope of his vocals in this record, and I can imagine this cries out for a sing-along live. It's a little extreme to have this following Bunny Blues. It kind of almost feels like the carpet is ripped out from underneath you, but individually I think it stands as an amazing song. Track 3, entitled Most High, is the first new record that hasn't been released prior to the album coming out. And on first and second listen, I have the same opinion. It feels kind of rushed. The drum pattern feels kind of lazy, and the production is a little too clean for what I like when it comes to Lost Under Heaven's work. I think the building blocks are certainly there with this. It just feels a little bit more like a demo than a finished record. I really love the strings and the epicness that comes with this record, but I think it's the drums and the tempo that really let this song down. I remember Jamie T did this single version of, is it Emily's Heart? He did this single version of Emily's Heart when he released it in 2009, and it just completely ruined it. As a song, it didn't need drums, but if you're gonna put drums in there, then at least make them, you know, fun. And this track feels a little bit like that. Black Sun Rising sees Ebony take the lead vocal again, with Ellery taking support. Musically, this track has this real wonderful cinematic feel to it, and I think it works really well as an album track. It's a record, again, with plenty of space, and reminds me of bands like the XX or Warpaint, and certainly has this Chris Isaak's Wicked Games kind of feel to it. It's a track that builds really well, something that Lost Under Heaven do. They've made an art form out of, especially in their first record, but it kind of builds into nothing. It reminds me a little bit of London Grammar, not quite as dreary as London Grammar, but still kind of dreary. And at 80 BPM, we're really beginning to slow down now. This third track that we've had, which hasn't got a lot of energy. Track 6 is the title track, called Love Hates What You've Become. It's the slowest track on the album at 70 BPM. And I think for me, this record is trying to capture the same kind of atmosphere as Future Blues. But at this point, we've already had 3 slow songs on the record, and I'm just gagging for some energy. And whilst I think slow records are really important on a body of work, they give the listener some breathing space to kind of take what's coming. We've had a lot of it so far. The 3 previous tracks are kind of low energy records, and I'm just at this stage getting a little bored. The majority of the track is drum free. Now, I'm not opposed to that, and I think that works really well, especially if you're building into something. But when the drum finally does kick in, oh, the helicopter's taken off. But when the drum finally does kick in, it's just as lazy as Most High. And you're left with this record that is attempting to build in a way that only Lost Under Heaven can, but it actually fails to deliver on it. Come on, make my heart beat faster. Won't you set my soul on fire? Track 7, Serenity says, we jump back up 135 BPM. That's nearly double the previous record. It's the first upbeat record in nearly 20 minutes of listening, and it's desperately needed by this point. Fortunately, this record doesn't fail to deliver. It has this really cool dub reggae influence to it, especially with the bass line. It sounds like it's come straight out of a reggae record. And the drums have this real cool, choppy sample sound to them, which I think adds some much needed and really great energy. It's certainly a record that I can imagine going down well live, and it's actually been stuck in my head for the last few days since I listened to it. The chorus is super catchy and highly wailable. However, I do feel it's crying out for a bit of a bass or guitar solo. Just a little bit more music towards the end. It's an album track, you don't need to play by any rules. Track 8, Savage Messiah, has this real Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds influence to it. In a dusty black coat with a red right hand. In fact, if you listen hard enough, you can actually hear him singing that record. And if you've ever questioned the influence of Tom Waits and Ellery's vocals, this is the song to prove you wrong. However, I feel it's another track that's let down by its tempo and production. It's lacking groove and it feels kind of rigid. And a song that I feel could have been this real dark and scary record is, I don't know, it doesn't hit the nail in the same way that I wanted it to. I feel this would be easily fixable. Just change the drums slightly. I would actually probably put in a kind of old, slowed down funky drummer or Amen sample It's similar to kind of the way that Amy Shark uses in Adore.
Give me a drink, I get drunk, I won't sip just so I can adore you.
Or At the River by Groove Armada. I think in this situation that would work in an almost harrowing kind of tone, whilst also giving it a nice edge. It feels too clean for me. It feels wonderfully warm, but I just think as a song, it's the vibe I hate the word vibe. The vibe I'm getting from this song is that actually it should be dark and a bit nasty and gritty, but it's too clean for that. Or I would give it a kind of cowboy beat, similar to Providence by Foles. I think that would work really well. Track 9 is another song that we've heard prior. It's called Postmillennial Tension. When I first heard it, I thought it was kind of dull. It's seriously grown on me. I think it's a really wonderful record, even if it is another slow record, something which this album is not lacking in. However, even though this song is lacking drums, it has enough going on with tempo. It changes from 100 to 150, then when it changes back to 100 it adds drums, giving it this feeling of progression, whilst also actually it's just a simple little trick, but I think it works great. This record reminds me so much of some of the slower songs on the first record, on the first album. It starts as this really beautiful slow piano record and builds into this epic thing that I think Lost Under Heaven do really, really well. And I think this record it's just one of those records that proves why Lost Under Heaven have the ability to build epicness and emotion into their records better than anyone else. As said before, it starts as this slow, emotive piano ballad before changing times, then adding horn samples, and we get some of Ebony's support vocals, and then when the drums come in, it really starts to build into something way more epic than we've had in the kind of mid-album lull. It has this almost motivational speech kind of sound to it that I think works really well. The lyrics in the chorus read, "Everybody's singing fuck the world, close your eyes, it will be alright." And the bridge reads, "My generation's burning, but still we sing our love songs." It's certainly a highlight I didn't expect to have on the record, and it's one that I'm really, really enjoying.
Everybody sing fuck the world, close your eyes and you'll be alright. I love saying this I will, understand, take up the fight.
And the last track on this album is probably the most sounding record, and it was my favourite going in. It's a song called For the Wild. It's a record that I got obsessed with a couple of months ago when I first heard it. And personally it reminds me of spending the weekend down in Byron Bay. I remember standing and staring at the sea whilst I was incredibly intoxicated. But I think it's the biggest throwback to their first album for sure. It has this old yet timeless feel to it. The synths have a very reminiscent kind of sound, reminding you of people like The Cure. Whilst the guitars have that kind of anthem rock sound of people like Bruce Springsteen. For the Wild is without a doubt my favourite song on this album. Currently, that may change. I do really like some of the other songs on this album. And on first listen, I really struggled with a lot of this. It's sunk in a bit and I'm really beginning to enjoy it. And I think it's just a great record. It was one of my favourites of last year, for sure. So it was always going to sit well with me. All in all, in conclusion, I think this is a huge return for Lost Under Heaven. It's really great to have them back and have some new music. I really want to see them thrive. That first album, honestly, is one of my favourites of all time. So I'm really excited to see them back and releasing new music and hopefully playing some more gigs. And album number 2 sees way more of an input from Ebony, something that I know my girlfriend isn't a fan of, but I am, so that's fine. On the first album, she really only really had a big input on Futured Blues. This one, she takes the lead on a couple of records, and also kind of duets on one of the records too. And before I even listened to this album, I already knew half of it going in. It was stuff that was already released in the last kind of 12 months. So some of it wasn't new, and the biggest hurdle I've had is listening to it as a collective body of work rather than 5 songs that I fell in love with separately. And I think initially that was something that I really did struggle with. Come, Bunny Blues, For the Wild and Breath of the Light were all tracks worthy of obsession in my opinion. All in all, I think it's a great collection of work. I've really enjoyed having them back. Do I think it'll make it into Album of the Year? Probably not. I mentioned before, Album of the Year is something I hold in a really high regard. It's something where they just have to nail it. And unfortunately, I think this record falls short on 4 records, 3 of which I think the building blocks are there. They just need a producer that's emotionally invested enough to dare to make the moves that make Lost Under Heaven great in the first place. But I think one of the other biggest problems of this album is just the ordering of the tracks. It feels like it starts, it goes higher, and then it has this huge dip before going up a bit, down a bit, and then up a bit again. It doesn't feel cohesive or consistent. It just it feels very put together at the last minute. When I first listened to it, I actually thought I had it stuck on shuffle because it just didn't have a consistency that I felt worked. You have this huge epic opening with Come, and then it goes up with Bunny Blues, and then you just have literally 20 minutes of ballady slow music. It doesn't really pick up again, except for a couple of tracks at the end. One of the things I absolutely loved about that first album was how each record flowed into each other. And I could not imagine listening to them in any other order. That's clearly how they were designed and put together. Whereas this one, and I don't know if that's just because I heard 5 tracks before and they're all separate, but it didn't feel like it was meant to be told, that story is meant to be told in that way. It's a little bit like when people try to make a Quentin Tarantino film, but they're not Quentin Tarantino. And this is a bit like one of those films where you have to push through the middle bit to enjoy the climax. So all in all, it's an album that I had very high expectations for, and it hasn't quite hit where I wanted it to. There are a few tracks that I just adore so much. At least 5 of the tracks on this album, 5 of the tracks on this album are 10s out of 10s, if not 6 tracks. And there's just 3 or 4 that I think are just really weak. 3 of them I know just need to be worked on. And that it kind of upsets me. I kind of feel let down because I really loved that first album of theirs. So that's probably as much my fault as anyone else. I'm really interested to hear your opinion. I don't know if I should give a score. If I had to give a score, I'd give it 7 out of 10. Although I have to admit, I've been becoming more obsessed with some of the other records. So perhaps I need to just keep listening to it. This is very much an initial reaction. I probably listened to it 5 times over the weekend, and that was in-depth, concentrating, listening, thinking about it. I probably need to listen to it a bit more to give it an accurate score, but my initial reaction, my gut reaction if you will, would be a 7 out of 10. Have you listened to this album? What do you think? I'd love to know if you have any highlights, if there are tracks that I said I've loved that you haven't loved, or if there's something that I've just completely missed, then I'd be really interested to see what you have to say. Thoughts in the comment section below as always, and I'll see you next time. Cheers, bye.